Welcome back to CBS Mornings. We are continuing our CBS News investigation into claims that the U.S. military ignored reports of domestic violence within its ranks. Roughly 100,000 incidents of domestic abuse have been reported to the military since 2015. Now, during that time, the Pentagon spent more than $1 billion on a program meant to help the survivors. Even so, military spouses, partners, and service members told us their reports of abuse were dismissed. CBS Evening News anchor and managing editor Norah O'Donnell spoke with an advocate who's worked with hundreds of survivors. She says the resources offered by the Pentagon are just not enough, and the consequences are dire.
I realized that there wasn't a lot of help, so I decided to just do this myself.
Before Lisa Colella became an advocate for domestic violence victims, she managed a restaurant in North Carolina near Camp Lejeune. In 2013, her staff started coming to her about problems at home after their spouses returned from deployments.
They were angry that they were drinking more, that they were blocking them out of bank accounts, that all they had was their tip money to feed their children.
How many of the servers were military spouses?
Probably out of 100, 75, 80.
How many of them told you they had been victims of domestic violence?
I would say about half, depending on the type of violence.
Half?
Half, absolutely.
That's
and
a lot.
maybe more. Mm-hmm.
Lisa quit her job at the restaurant and started her organization, Healing Households 6.
Do you think victims are safe after they report it?
I don't.
In fact, CBS News spoke with nearly 40 survivors who reported abuse to the military. Many feared for their safety.
Did you feel like you were in danger after you reported what happened?
Yes. Yes, I still feel in danger.
After allegations of domestic violence are reported, DoD policy requires commanders to tell victims about resources. But the survivors we spoke to said that didn't happen.
There was no protection for me. There was no help. There was no resources.
Victims have needs, and they need to get what they deserve in terms of mental health and support, financial situations. You know, this is a pretty extensive epidemic.
The military does have a program designed to support victims of abuse. It's called the Family Advocacy Program. But our reporting found it hasn't lived up to its mission.
They did nothing but support him as a service member, even though I'm also a service member.
They weren't supporting me at all. And they were talking to both of us. So I would literally be in these meetings, and it was like listening to him. She was using his words, and it just was traumatizing.
Survivors Lisa has worked with told her the same.
I've never had anyone report to me that they received any type of help with moving, any type of help with food assistance, any type of help with just getting a protection order. I don't think the program is useful at all.
The military also offers domestic violence survivors a benefit called transitional compensation. It's a stipend intended to help victims pay for basic living expenses after they leave an abusive home.
All of the 700 people that I've spoke to, I've only known 2 that have said that they even qualified for it, and only 1 that could show me a record of payment.
It's pretty hard to get assistance.
From what I can tell, yes. You only get the compensation if your spouse is convicted of some type of assault or domestic violence and were removed from the military. So the criteria is almost impossible to meet.
All right, man, ready?
Commanders decide if a case will go to court-martial. Of the nearly 40 survivors we spoke to, none saw their case move forward to trial.
If commanders are going to accept the responsibility and take the limelight, they need to do the job, and they're not doing the job.
Well, you've got a closed system that's allowed to police itself. With the commander's discretion situation or scenario, you know, that individual sees a version of my abuser every day, a work self. I got the version at home that scares me.
Lisa's organization has helped hundreds of victims. She's only seen 2 cases go to a court-martial.
Are offenders being held accountable?
No. In my experience, no.
Sounds like it's being tolerated.
All the time.
And what are the consequences of that?
This is significant trauma. Women who are abused have a very difficult time seeking employment, staying with employment. There's the consequence of losing health care. There's the consequence of not being able to support your children and having them taken from you.
Survivors told us they're still dealing with the trauma.
It's mostly the nightmares and waking up at night, not being able to have relationships because I'm terrified.
I just have anxiety all the time. I'll never be the person I was before I met him.
This is an issue, and it's no longer something that needs to be swept under the rug. Stop aiding and abetting criminals.
The Pentagon acknowledges they have work to do. In a statement to CBS News, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin told us President Biden has placed an unprecedented priority on tackling this problem. For CBS Mornings, I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington.
And we want you to know you can read their full statement on the website, but it has to be, guys, such a helpless feeling to report it and think, now I'm going to be safe, and still not feel safe even after you report it.
No doubt about it. And we hear that justice reforms are on the way to help these women.
Yeah.
So they're not described as victims or survivors, but that's just the first layer. I think they also need to encourage men and women that might have the propensity for domestic violence to seek the help that they need and offer therapy to them.
Yeah, nice of you to say men or women, but
Yes.
we see all women sitting there.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, this is mostly men doing it.
No doubt about it.
Raised such a good point. Men need to be involved in this conversation. And you can see more of that investigation tonight on the CBS Evening News. Norah sits down with a former Army attorney who worked with dozens of survivors and calls this a crisis.